This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMuddstah. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game has Charles, Corwin, and Fred joining me. Charles has brought out his enchanting Gruul deck with Kaima keeping Vow of Lightning, Zndrsplt Druid, Rampant Growth, Forest, Mountain, One with Nature, and a Vengeful Ancestor. I am still testing out my Nahiri deck, keeping Ghost Quarter, the Reaver Cleaver, Sword of Feast and Famine, Enlightened Tutor, War Room, Snow-Covered Plains, and Akroma's Will. Corwin is playing his Karlov the Ghost Council deck, keeping the Ozolith, 2 Plains, a Swamp, Resplendent Angel, Lurrus of the Dream Den, and Sensei's Divining Top. Last but not least, Fred is playing his Zndrsplt and Okaun deck, keeping Pongify, Chaos Warp, Island, Bloodsworn Steward, Mountain, Gamble, and Mystic Remora. Charles wins a die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a Forest. I play a Snow-Covered Plains and tap it for a white for Enlightened Tutor. I go to search for a Boros Signet to put on top as I pass. Corwin plays a Plains and casts Sensei's Divining Top. Fred draws, playing an island, and then casting a sad Mystic Remora, wishing that he'd started the game. Charles has a mountain for turn, and casts Rampant Growth. He goes to find a mountain, and Fred's happy as he gets to draw a card. I play a War Room, and cast Boros Signet, and Fred draws yet another card. Corwin plays a Swamp for turn, and is able to cast Karlov, passing to Fred. Fred pays the 1 for Mystic Remora and draws for turn. He plays a mountain, and then casts Shadowspear, passing. Charles's main phase has him casting Cultivate to find a basic for the field tapped and 1 to his hand, and Fred gets to draw a card. With nothing else, he passes. I play a Ghost Quarter and cast Pia, Consul of Revival, passing to Corwin. Corwin's got a Plains for turn, and plays 3 for a Resplendent Angel. Going to combat, he hits Fred for 2 with Karlov, and passes. Fred decides not to pay the cumulative upkeep for the Mystic Remora, letting it go to the graveyard, and draws. He plays a Training Center, and then casts Gamble. He finds his card, and randomly discards a Chaos Warp. Fred then casts Soul Ring, and passes. Charles has a mountain for turn, and in his main phase, casts Kaima. He then casts One with Nature, and enchants it onto the Resplendent Angel. Moving to his end step, Kaima goads the Angel, and gets a +1/+1 counter as Charles passes. I draw and play the Reaver Cleaver, and pass to Corwin. Corwin plays a Swamp, and then casts the Ozolith. He then casts Lurrus and moves to combat. He has to swing the Angel, which goes at Fred for 3, and Charles gets to find a land from the One with Nature trigger. After that, Corwin passes. Fred has a Great Furnace for turn, and he then plays half of his commanders with Zndrsplt. He moves to combat, flipping a coin, and getting tails, drawing no cards. Charles has a Forest for turn, and then plays Destructive Urge on Lurrus. He follows up with a Vengeful Ancestor, which as it enters, goads Pia. Charles then moves to his end step, and he triggers Kaima, goading stuff and adding more counters to his commander. I draw and attach the Reaver Cleaver to Pia. I then go to combat and swing Pia at Fred, and I take 1 from the Vengeful Ancestor, while Fred simply blocks a Zndrsplt. Not getting any treasures and having not drawn a land, I just have to pass. Corwin draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He then goes to combat, and once more has to swing the Angel, swinging it at Fred, and Lurrus goes at me. This has Corwin losing 2, and before damage, Fred responds by casting Pongify on the Angel, but I still take the hit from Lurrus, and I have to sacrifice a land. Corwin also gains 3 life from Lurrus, which lets him add 2 +1/+1 counters to Karlov, and he passes after that. Fred plays a Buried Ruin for his land for turn, and then plays out a Bloodsworn Steward, and then a Mogg Assassin. He moves to combat, and flips a coin for Zndrsplt, but unfortunately hits tails, and with nothing else, has to pass. Charles draws, and casts Vow of Lightning, putting that onto Karlov. He then plays out a Pero Ixum on Bloodsworn Steward, and goes to combat. This has him swinging the Vengeful Ancestor at me, and as it attacks, he goads Pia again, and I then take the hit. In his post-combat main phase, Charles then plays a Zrta Druid, and moves to his end step, triggering Kaima to goad stuff and add more +1/+1 counters to it. I draw and play a Felwar Stone, and then go to combat. I swing Pia at Corwin, who blocks with Karlov. I still haven't hit a land, and I've got no treasures, so all I can do is pass, while Corwin activates his top on my end step to rearrange his top 3. Corwin draws and plays a Plains. He plays out Angel of Destiny, taking 2 from the Ancient Tomb. Going to combat, he swings Lurrus and Karlov at Fred. Fred blocks Lurrus with the Bloodstone Steward, and takes 6 from Karlov. Fred gains 6 back because of the Angel of Destiny, as does Corwin, and after that, Corwin passes. Fred reveals a Swiftfoot Boots to the Proxysm and draws. He then plays a Flamekin Village, and then casts his other commander, Okaun. Going to combat, he flips tails off Zndrsplt and gets nothing, but then gets some flips for Okaun, hitting heads 3 times, which draws him 3 and doubles Okaun's power 3 times. Fred then swings Okaun at Charles and the Bloodsworn Steward at me for 7. Charles tumps with a Zrta Druid though. In his post-combat main phase, Fred then activates Mogg Assassin and targets Kaima, but unfortunately flips another tails and fails. Charles chooses to kill Okaun instead, and after that, Fred passes. Charles draws and plays a Forest. Going to combat, he swings the Vengeful Ancestor at me and Kaima at Fred. We both take our hits, and after that, Charles gets his Kaima trigger on his end step, adding more counters and goading stuff, and passing. My main phase has Divine Reckoning hitting the stack. This will wipe the board except for 1 creature per opponent, and Corwin keeps the Angel of Destiny, Fred keeps Zndrsplt, and Charles keeps Kaima. Without a land drop though, I have to pass to Corwin. Corwin plays a Rogue's Passage, and then activates his Sensei's Divining Top before recasting Karlov. Going to combat, he moves Karlov's all counters off the Ozolith onto the Angel of Destiny, and then swings it at Fred. Fred once more takes the hit, but it's actually no damage because the Angel gains it back, and Corwin gains 12, and Karlov gains some counters. After that, Corwin passes. Fred draws and plays a Mountain. He then plays Yusri, and then a Swiftfoot Boots, which he equips to Yusri, and also gives it the Shadow Spear. Going to combat, Fred dreams big and chooses 5 coins with Yusri, only hitting 1 heads though, which has him taking 8 and drawing 2 cards total, but he actually gains the 8 back thanks to Shadow Spear, giving Yusri lifelink. Fred then swings Yusri at Charles for 3, which he takes, and gains 3 more life. Fred passes after that. Charles draws and plays a Forest. Going to combat, he swings Kaima at Fred, who chumps with Zndrsplt to avoid near-lethal commander damage, and after that, has to pass. I draw and just play Tashar, passing. Corwin plays an Emergent Zone, and then casts Orzhov Signet. Going to combat, he swings the Angel of Destiny at Charles and Karlov at Fred. They both take their hits, and they both gain life with Karlov triggering twice. Moving to his end step, since he's above 55 life, Corwin kills Charles with the Angel trigger and passes. Fred draws and plays a Mountain. He then replays Okaun and equips him with the Swiftfoot Boots. Going to combat, if it's tails it fails, he flips for the Okaun flip, and fails. He then chooses 5 coins for Yusri, and only gets 1 heads again, and draws a card and doubles Okaun's power only once. He then swings both creatures at Corwin, who then sacrifices the Emergent Zone in response to cast Living Death. With the creatures in play swapped for the ones in the graveyard, combat is essentially blanked. Moving to his post-combat main phase, Fred then equips the Swiftfoot boots onto his Mog Assassin. He then activates it, choosing the Resplendent Angel, and he hits a heads, destroying the Angel. After that, Fred passes. I draw and equip the Reaver Cleaver to Pia, and then go to combat. I swing Pia at Corwin, dealing 3 and gaining 3 treasures. I pass after that. Corwin plays a Godless Shrine which he has come in tapped, and he goes to combat, putting all the Ozolith counters onto Lurrus. He then activates the Rogue's Passage to make it unblockable. He swings Lurrus at Fred, who takes the hit, and Corwin gains that much, and passes to Fred. Fred's got a Mountain for turn, and replays Okaun, and then casts Krark before moving to combat. He continues to flip tails for Okaun unfortunately, but then swings it at Corwin for 5. Before damage, Fred activates Mog Assassin and targets Lurrus, and hits ahead and is able to destroy it. Okaun's power is also doubled, and Corwin takes 10 commander damage. After that, Fred passes. I draw and play a Sword of Feast and Famine, equipping it onto Pia. Going to combat, I swing Pia at Corwin and cast Boros Charm to give it double strike. Corwin takes it, and I get to untap my lands twice, and he discards 2 cards, while I also gain 10 treasures. After combat, I cast a Shadow Spear of my own and a Batterbone, and then finally cast Nahiri. I then pass the turn, with Corwin activating his top during my end step. Corwin draws and plays Karlov. He then plays out a Death Greeter and moves to combat. He moves 12 counters onto Karlov from the Ozolith and passes. Fred draws and plays a Spark Double, with Corwin responding by removing 6 +1/+1 counters from Karlov to exile Okaun. Fred then has the Spark Double resolve, entering as a copy of the Bloodsworn Steward. He then recasts Zndrsplt. Moving to combat, Fred activates the Mog Assassin and targets Karlov, and flipping into a head, he takes out the Legendary. He also then gets to draw a card from Zndrsplt, and then moves to resolve the Zndrsplt trigger and flips for it, but unfortunately gets a Tails. Fred then swings the Bloodsworn Steward at Corwin, and after that, he passes. During his end step, I activate my War Room, drawing a card and losing 2. I draw and cast a main phase of Chroma's Will, getting both modes from it, and swing everything at Corwin except for the Batterbone, which goes at Fred. Everyone has to take the damage since they have basically protection from all colors, and I get to exile the top 2 cards from my Nahiri trigger. I then play Sacred Peaks from exile, making a Thopter token from Pia, seeing the land come in, and cast Scholar of New Horizons. I then equip the Shadow Spear on Nahiri. I follow that up with Sensei's Divining Top, and pass, with Corwin spinning his top on my end step. Corwin draws, and then draws with the top. He then casts a combo of Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond, and goes to combat, moving the Ozolith counters to the Death Greeter. He swings it at Fred, which will trigger the combo if he jumps or takes damage, and with no way out, Fred and I are both dead to the combo. Game review time. This game was 1 hour, 1 minute, and 39 seconds. Unfortunately for that, most of the time I spent with Nahiri not drawing lands. I kept an incredibly greedy hand and got super blown out when that Lurrus with the enchantment connected and I was forced to sacrifice a land, and the only saving grace I really had was having the Reaver Cleaver. Sure, it took me several turns to get a creature and enough mana to put it onto something, but once that started going, it was actually pretty good. I first encountered Corwin's Karlov deck at the Magic Fest in Gatineau, and it promptly beat an entire table to death after a very explosive couple turns. This game was a little bit slower, and I actually heated a couple surprising plays, like that Emergent Zone with a Living Death. I don't think he actually needed it. I think he was in a good position with that Angel to win, but he seemed to feel the need to, so that's what happened. Fred's Zndrsplt and Okaun deck did exactly what the deck wants to do, which is flip some dice or coins or whatever you want to call it, and sometimes fail. I actually thought that Yusri having the Shadow Spear was pretty sweet, since it got rid of any of the downside of taking damage, as Yusri is the one who's dealing the damage, and since it has lifelink, means that Fred was actually gaining what he lost. Charles is a self-proclaimed Gruul lover, and having seen some of his more impactful Gruul decks, I can definitely understand why. And I think this is the first time that I've ever seen a Kaima deck. It requires a very specific type of deck building, But Goat is a very strong mechanic, and as you saw, Kaima got massive by the mid-game. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.